All right, welcome everyone to our second episode of this podcast that me and my friend Bruce have. Title still undetermined. We'll come up with that sometime in the future. But as I said before in the first episode, this conversation is mainly a catalyst for me and Bruce to be able to convey our opinions in a way that we cannot do so on Thinking Out Loud, because that is a podcast that is mostly interview driven. And because of that, we're sort of constrained by giving our own personal opinions because the primary focus of that podcast is to elucidate the opinions of the person that we are interviewing rather than us giving our own input or attempting to debate the person that we are debating. So we decided to create this podcast so that way we can give our 2 cents on issues ourselves. Bruce, how has your day been today? Everything all good on your end?
Well, it's tiring. Um, I hope I'm not being premature by saying this, but I think COVID is at an end. Knock on wood. If I'm wrong, someone please feel free to tell me that I'm full of it. I'm trying to get back to my normal activities. I'm working from home. I'm just going back to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practice and doing some ballroom dancing and all the kind of stuff. And um, life is just getting back to the same busy schedule as it was before.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Feeling a little exhausted. I'm actually working with Fair right now, taking care of some stuff on their end, and um, I think it's a really important organization now that guy. It's probably safe to say that we've lost the ACLU, and we really need these new organizations to stand straight up on their own.
Right.
I really want to play a part in making that come to pass. We actually have a civil rights movement that's committed to principle, not to ideology.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'll be throwing my energy behind.
Yeah, I think I can safely say that I am a fair chapter leader. I've been in discussions with them about opening up a chapter at my university, and everything has gone well so far, especially considering that the university is under the impression that this is another woke campus org, which is certainly not the case. And so they embraced me with open arms. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if there is some tension between the people who join the club or the organization under the impression that this is a woke club. This is a club that expects to hear critical race theories when they walk in. This is a club that they expect to hear Kimberly Crenshaw repeated or Robin DiAngelo repeated or Ibram Kendi repeated. We're going to see what happens because it's the exact opposite of those thinkers. And so we're going to see if there will be some tension in that club and if I get in trouble somehow. I don't think I will. I think it'll be fine. And I think most people that will join under the impression that it's supposed to be woke, but I think they will be receptive towards these sorts of ideas that Fair pushes out because Fair is not this extremist right-wing conservative Ben Shapiro light think tank. It really isn't. It's a pretty milk toast. I would say. I would say it's actually um much closer to someone like John McWhorter than it is to someone like James Lindsay or Ben Shapiro. So I think we'll be fine so long as we properly convey what Fair is about and what it is not about. And so I think this is a good way to lead into the conversation that we're going to have today, in which Fair deals with some pretty contentious issues, obviously. So it deals, I would say, that Fair is contentious in the sense and contentious among the select few that we often are vocal against. It's contentious amongst these people because it is very much against this new dogma of anti racism that has been perpetuated in the upper echelons of academia. And so, what I often wonder is how does this, I think, okay, let me see if I can clarify this. I can safely say that I don't have a single woke friend. And that is not by virtue of me ignoring these people, that is by virtue of these people ignoring me. And so this is one of the things that I was thinking about recently, in which if you are woke, sufficiently woke, woken by the definition that we tend to use here, then you cannot be friends with someone such as yourself or I, because the modus operandi is that you cannot even give us any any airtime. So they try to avoid people like you and I in the same way that people on the far right, on the alt right, would ignore you and I, in the same way that someone like Steven Crowder ignores debating Sam Cedar. Not that Steven Crowder is alt right or far right, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. And so, because of that, I don't have any woke friends. I have conservative friends. I have very, very progressive friends, but progressive friends who are not woke. I have Democrat friends. I have center left friends. And I have Republican friends, registered Republicans as friends, such as Thomas Sheedy. And so, for me personally, on a friendship level, I do not mind having a conversation or being friends with anybody regardless of their viewpoints. Now, if someone is very, very far on one side, so if someone is far right, I don't think I can be friends with you because I legitimately would think that you're a terrible human being. If someone is far left, I think I could still be friends with them. That to me has always been an interesting observation on my end, where even if someone is really, really far on the left spectrum, we're talking about tanky Twitter, I think I'd still be fine being friends with you. But I cannot say the same thing for the far right. But now let's translate this into relationships. Whom are we willing to be in a relationship with once we start focusing on politics, once we start focusing on cultural viewpoints? My knee jerk reaction would be to say, I do not mind if my significant other is a hard lefty or is overwhelmingly woke. I personally don't mind that. In fact, I would actually be excited about the types of conversations that we would have. But I have this suspicious feeling that that person would mind me, that that person would not want to listen to my viewpoints. And I think inevitably, as much as I would like to not acknowledge this and not believe this, I feel like inevitably we're going to raise our voices more so than we should be doing so. And we're simply not going to be able to have a fruitful relationship. So, to start off this conversation, I would say, and this is something that I have not thought deeply about, but hopefully this podcast will be the catalyst for us thinking deeply about this. My initial reaction would be to say, I think I could be in a fruitful and meaningful relationship without as much tension as one would expect with someone whom is woke, and and it would work out. Um, I don't know what you think though. What are your thoughts on this issue?
Okay.
And you've actually dealt with this before, so you have a lot more experience with this than I do.
Okay. Yeah, I actually disagree
Mhm.
quite heavily on this aspect. Let me get into what I mean by that. So a few weeks ago, I had breakfast with some friends of mine who are relatively conservative. Um, if I was to put them on a spectrum, I think I'd probably single them. I'd probably place them around the center right to mid right position, somewhere in between there. Um, but these individuals are just these incredibly kind people who have, in my observation, and I have seen them treat people of different ethnicities, sexualities, trans people, what have you, all around, all shapes and sizes, treat people with the utmost respect and care. And they voted for Trump. They're conservative, they're Republican. I can be friends with them absolutely because politics is messy. It's not as clear cut as people would like to make it, but their values and their heart, at the end of the day, I think it's in the right place. Ditto with people who are center left and center left to mid left. I someone I dated was consider herself someone on the spectrum. Was in general not a was in general in some ways not a fan of SJWs, although she argued that it was a spectrum. I didn't quite agree with everything she said, but she was of the opinion that SJWs were a problem, but we're not worth talking about. So within there's some kind of wiggle room.
Mhm.
But when we're talking about like the far right, we're talking about actual like actual racists, actual Nazis, or and that's where our values diverge so much that I don't think I can ever have an actual friendly relationship with them because of at that point ideology has replaced rational thought. Last year we had a talk with Peter Boghossian, and he said something at the time that I thought was very, very peculiar. Do you remember when we asked him a question about like, isn't putting pronouns in your bio a sign of solidarity with the trans community? And he said no. And he said something along the lines that sometimes with people who identify like this tend to be some of the nastiest people on this planet. Now, at the time, I didn't understand what he was talking about, but I've been spending a lot of time on Clubhouse. I've been spending a lot of time speaking to people who are actually woke, and I've noticed that these people tend to take these far left social justice warriors, these regressive leftists, these wokies, tend to when if you have a divergent opinion, they immediately they immediately impugn your character, they immediately impugn your motives, and you're labeled as a racist and a bad person in their eyes, and you have no, there's no way you could possibly disagree with them and not be a bad person, and
Mhm.
therefore that relationship is poisoned right from the outset, and the conversation quickly devolves into some kind of into something that's just so toxic and poisonous that it becomes just you just want to leave the room. You don't want to engage with them anymore. It's like, it's just so loony that there's really nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
You're a racist, or you spend you're accused of being a racist. You got to spend all your time defending that you're not. Now you see this reflected on the right, in my opinion, as well. There's this conversation that's recorded on YouTube where this guy actually invited a someone who's on the far right, uh, talking about the ethno states or whatnot, and he was trying to have a productive conversation with this guy, and he just wasn't listening in that regard. Just so this guy was definitely in actual white supremacy. He believed that because he was white, he was superior. It didn't matter, like the stuff about people's common humanity or whatever. And so with these people who are just so entrenched, I don't think you can have a relationship with them. I did like the horseshoe theory, where the far left and the far right, they're really alike in a lot of ways, in my opinion. So I don't think there's anything wrong with calling yourself left wing or right wing, because there's virtues to be found in those foundational principles, as long as you keep them moderated. But
Mm.
if you go to the far right, you find extreme nationalism. You find the beginnings of an ethno state. If you go to the far left, you actually find um, you know actual socialists, actual people who are just so entrenched in that ideology, and they all meet in some kind of weird uh, intercept point of authoritarianism. And if your ideologies are that totalitarian, if they're all encompassing, if they rot your critical thinking processes, and you have to mangle facts to fit your worldview, there's no relationship there.
Mhm.
And how strongly do I feel about it? I'm a seven. I'm a 7 out of 10 on this belief.
Okay.
Why is it not a full 10? Is because I've seen someone like Dia Khan actually have conversations with people like this, and she's able to interject, like, her reach out to the humanity there in the person across the table from her. But
Mhm.
my contention is that maybe this person had some kind of these people probably had some misgivings in the first place, or has some kind of humanistic value that she was able to touch. If the person was further along, I don't think there's anything to talk about. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think what we have to take into consideration is that there's a lot of variability amongst the woke crowd. So the woke person that you are describing, in which they are consistently calling you a racist just by virtue of, what would it be this time with someone like us? Just we can't say with us it's because we're white, because we're not, but being complicit in a system that is rigged against either the poor class that are overwhelmingly black, or that is rigged against people of color because of prejudice and bias. I would be really annoyed and irritated by that at first, but in my personal opinion, I think I can safely say I would be more interested than annoyed at the end of the day if this person is willing to have a conversation with me. And this is one specific group of people that are woke. There are other woke people who don't necessarily believe that, but they believe every other woke dogma in the textbook. But they wouldn't say that just because you're white, therefore you are racist. In fact, there are many of these woke people who repudiate something like Robin DiAngelo and say that Robin DiAngelo is wrong and her thesis is wrong. And I think with these group of people, I would definitely be okay with having a conversation with, especially if I have had instances in which I was on the verge of getting into relationships with conservative Christians. And these are conservative Christians that are pretty classic, I would say. They're pretty traditionalist, and I was still able to have enjoyable conversations with them, even though I think that what they believe is more dangerous than what the woke lefty believes. I would rather live in a world filled with woke lefties than I would with conservative Christians. Um, and yet I was still able to enjoy a conversation with this person. I was still able to imagine myself in a relationship with this person, and if I can do that for this person, then I should most certainly be able to do it with a woke lefty. And so that's where my mentality comes from. But as I think you rightly pointed out, there is a specific person out there that I wouldn't be able to do this with. I wouldn't be able to do this with a right wing nationalist. I simply would not. I think that their values are so diametrically opposed to mine, in a way that I can consider themselves as a classic movie villain in which you don't want to befriend them. On the right, that on the right, that caricature is obvious. On the left, we would have someone, I would say, someone like Robin DiAngelo. I probably would, if someone believed the same things that Robin DiAngelo did, or if someone believed the same things that someone like Ibram Kendi does, or Kimberly Crenshaw, then I might have to reevaluate my opinion. But I don't define wokeness based on those three people because I think there's a lot more variability there. I think, generally speaking, if you average out the viewpoints of the woke, I would be able to date that person and have a relationship with that person. On the more extreme ends of what it means to be woke, I certainly wouldn't, in the same way that on the extreme end of what it means to be right wing, I wouldn't either. But the average of someone on the left and someone on the right, I think I can have a relationship with. The question then is, though, would they want to have a relationship with me? So the reason why that relationship never occurred with the conservative Christian one was because I myself was not a Christian. I did not hold the same values that she did when it came to marriage. I did not hold the same values that she did when it came to parenthood. And so that was a huge roadblock for her. It wasn't a roadblock for me. Her viewpoints were not a roadblock for me, but mine were to hers. And so that relationship never transpired. And my assumption would be, I've never had the opportunity to almost date someone who's woke lefty, but my assumption would be that something similar would occur there, where I personally would be okay with the viewpoints that she holds, especially when we're talking about marriage and parenthood. If we have a child and she wants to raise them genderless, I personally wouldn't care, because my belief would be that that child would, regardless, uh, regardless, that child would sort of move themselves towards something that, if that child is a boy, most likely that child would already just kind of want to do boy things just by biology. But even if they didn't, I really wouldn't care. And so, but the problem would be whether or not my viewpoints would be a problem for them, for her, because sorry guys, I'm straight. So that would be the issue. It's not that their viewpoints trespass enough on mine in a way that makes me uncomfortable. It's that mine trespass on theirs that makes them uncomfortable, and they wouldn't want to engage in a relationship. And I think that's fine. I totally get and understand when people say that they only want to date people with similar viewpoints as theirs, and I get it because it is taxing. It can get annoying constantly talking with someone that it feels like you're just yelling at a brick wall. I get it. I've been there. But me personally, I thrive on that, or I wouldn't say I thrive. I think that's a lie. I'm okay with that. I enjoy these conversations sometimes, and I think many of the times they can be productive, especially if this is someone whom you're close with. I have had many instances in which someone was pretty damn woke, but because you talk to this person constantly, they sort of try to change their views, and maybe you also sort of soften your views on some stances. I think these can be fruitful, and that is what I envision when I think about dating someone whose views are different from mine. But as I said before, for me, the concern would be that it's not that their views would annoy me, it's that my views would annoy them.
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah, me personally, I don't think I could date someone who has views that are all that divergent than mine.
Mhm.
Um, okay,
So
so
I don't mean to interrupt you, but so would you date a conservative Christian?
no.
No? Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay, so this is why. All right, the thing is, your views eventually are going to come down to a question of values,
Mhm.
right? All right, so if your underlying values are good, I can speak to someone. I can speak to someone there, and if someone is truly concerned about following through on those values, then at some point there's going to have to be some kind of intersection between values and logic in order to make sure those values inevitably win out. But that objective fact, there is no execution of those values in their purest context. When we're talking about the woke and conservative Christianity, okay, first of all, let's back up a little bit. What is conservative Christianity? All right, Christianity has been moderated over time. Its values have been subsumed by modernity, as we know. Like most modern Christians would not consider the idea of owning a slave abhorrent. They would come up with a bunch of ridiculous apologetics for it. The same way that a Wokey would try to come up with a bunch of ridiculous apologetics to refute like Thomas Sowell's work, or anyone else who brings up the material to refute the the gender spectrum as opposed to biological sex, that stuff. Okay, so if I'm if I'm to date someone or to have a relationship with somebody, then I need us to agree on certain points of reasoning that allow our values to converge, because a relationship in a lot of ways is a synergistic experience. You ebb and flow with one another. There has to be some level of compatibility at that level. If you don't, if your values are more important to you, then at somewhere along the line, your values have to fall in line with logic. I can't say I'm against slavery and all of a sudden say that the Bible doesn't endorse it. It does at some point. There's or I believe in loving and respecting all human beings, but this person's gay, so he or she should not get married. They should not. They should be put to death or something like that. I'm like, no, 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 no. You do not get to say, you do not get to preach about love and then like follow a line a line of thought that that takes you along the a series of actions that are the antithesis that are the antithesis of what love is. Um, so could I have a relationship with someone in this area? It would be a very contentious one, and a contentious relationship, in my opinion, is not a relationship you can have a layer of intimacy with someone with. I think it's disingenuous to say that, for
Mhm.
whether it's a wokey or conservative Christian, whether it's an extreme left wing or right wing person. At some point, your values have to align, and if
Right.
your values align, then at some point your reasoning has to align. If they clash, there's no relationship.
Mhm.
Not a good one. Not one that you would consider I can a deep friendship or or one that's based on like an intimacy.
Mhm.
Now, if you have, I think it's possible to have a close relationship with someone who I would consider nominally woke or nominally conservative, because see, like Christianity has been moderated a lot, and you won't find a lot of Christians today, like I was saying before earlier, that they're with their worldview. You won't find a Christian with a worldview that supports slavery or even putting gay people to death or whatnot. You'll probably find some ridiculous apologetics saying like, "Oh, that's the spiritual death," which I've heard before. They'll mangle it, but because their underlying values um, are still somewhat in line with modernity, and there's something there.
Mhm.
But to those who fall along more hard lines, then I'm sorry, there is no basis for a relationship there, in my opinion.
Mhm. Yeah, I get what you say. I agree with a lot of it, and I think it would be I think you can apply that to most people. Most people would definitely, I would say, agree with you, and they wouldn't be able to stand someone that they disagree with so staunchly, or as you said, someone that holds values just completely different from theirs. For me personally, and again, I want to make it perfectly clear that I'm not arguing for what people should do. This is me personally. I think the reason why I'm okay with it is because there's only two real values that I could that I, in your eyes, two values that I must align with on someone else in order for me to have an honest relationship with them. And the first one is recognize the utility of debates and recognize that the humanity of other people, where even if someone disagrees with you, even in a way that makes you believe that what they are doing is contributing to a net negative in life, you recognize their humanity, you recognize that they are believing the things that they believe because they think they are a good person. I think that's number 1, and if that's what the other person can recognize, and I like to think that I recognize it, then I think we're off on a good start, and that can be a catalyst for being able to change their minds in the future, or who knows, maybe them changing my mind. And the second is that there are objective facts in the world and that we can reason our way into different viewpoints. I think where I would say, so, as I was saying, that there's sort of a spectrum, there's a lot of variability amongst the woke crowd. I think a woke person that I wouldn't be able to have an honest dialogue with, or one that I would be able to have a relationship with because our values are so different, as you pointed out, is one of those crazies who I don't think are representative of the whole woke crowd, but those who say that there are no such thing as objective. Now, keep in mind, there's a significant enough number of people who believe these things to the point where they poison the well and to the point where they can change academia. But generally speaking, when you walk onto the street and you meet a lot of people whose profiles have pronouns or who have BLM stickers on their laptops, most of them, I would say, wouldn't believe this. So someone who actually believes that there's no such thing as objective facts, you cannot make a definitive claim of one thing over another, everything is completely culturally set, and there is no such thing as objective reality, and objectivity itself is rooted in whiteness. I think most woke people would not agree with this, but again, a significant enough number of them do, to the point where we have to be concerned about it. I think, if so long as you do not hold that viewpoint and you recognize the utility in debates, You can have BLM all over your profile. You can have your pronouns all over your profile. You can think that gender and sex are both social constructs. I think I could still have a relationship with you, but that's just because of the type of person that I am. That is not a prescription on the entire species. I think I can handle it. I get it if other people, such as yourself, cannot. I totally get it. But it does concern me that other people cannot. And I will say this, and again, this is not me making a moral claim. This is, as I said at the beginning of this video, this is something that I have not thought deeply about. But I do have this initial knee-jerk concern that other people can't do this. And if other people cannot simply, and again, we're not talking about people who think that objectivity is nonsense or that the white race should remain pure. We're talking about your typical standard university wokester. If people cannot, you know, get themselves to date these people or to see the humanity in these people to the point where maybe something can occur, or at least where you can stand rooming with one of these people in a way that you don't let your emotions get to you, I think that is going to create a culture in which the polarization that we see today in society is only going to greaten. It's only going to get worse. Polarization in the United States is just it is one of the many reasons why we're in such terrible shape right now, politically and culturally. It's because people are completely unwilling to have a conversation with someone on the opposite end of the aisle. And so, what seems to be occurring is that instead of trying to reach across the aisle and try to talk to each other and see what ideas are going to win out, what we seem to be doing now is just trying to make sure that more people will join our side of the aisle by making arguments and by making YouTube videos. We speak the loudest and we speak what we believe to be is the most coherently, and more people will join us, and we will just win because more people are on our side. But that victory was not made because we spoke with people that we disagreed with. That victory was because we were louder and because we drowned out the other voices and because we made the most sense individually, independently. But we didn't make the most sense when the other person was sitting right next to us because that other person was never right next to us. We never talked to them. And that's what worries me the most, is this inability to be able to talk to people, to see the humanity in other people. And that's what really that's why when I hear people saying that they would only date people who have the same values as them, what I hear and what worries me is that you are, and I don't mean you specifically, but rather this is just sort of a concern that I have. What I hear is that this person would be okay increasing the level of polarization, um, just just so long as their side wins. Um, and that's what concerns me.
Okay, well, let me ask you a question first. Like, how much time have you spent arguing with a diehard Wookiee?
Oh my god, I go to a pretty woke university.
I mean, a diehard woke.
Well, define diehard.
Okay.
What viewpoints would they have?
So let me give you an example. I walked into a room on Clubhouse once in which I was trying to have a good faith conversation with some of these wokes, and this is where I began to completely change my approach when I realized I was engaging with diehard. I wanted to bring up ideas that counteracted, that went against the grain of everything is everything that we see in our society is a result of is entirely the result of a racial hierarchical power structure.
Mhm.
I asked some of these individuals if it was okay if we would have a conversation in good faith and raise some contentious topics, and the people in this room from the outset asked me like, I'm not going to assume anything you're saying is in good faith. We'll just have to go with it as it is. And I thought like, okay, that's just the best I'm going to be able to do.
Yeah.
So I started bringing up some examples of of cultures around the world that have like disparities in outcomes, um, in which I've had friends uh, call out human rights abuses in other countries. And from the outset, as soon as I mentioned these other examples, they told me, do not use examples of other ethnicities. Keep it to yourself only. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. And when I went ahead with those examples anyway, they said like, oh, you're being microaggressive or whatever. And this is I was being offensive, and so my character was impugned from the outset. They tried to restrict my language. They wouldn't take a conversation or anything like that. So there's nothing to debate right there because they're from the outset they restricted the 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 spectrum of the topics I was allowed to address. Okay, there is no good faith. There is no debate from that angle when someone ties you down because that's automatically an impugnment of your motives.
Hmm.
And to say that you can have a conversation with these folks, um, in my opinion, from there is futile
Hmm.
because you have an example of an individual. Like, okay, so you said earlier that in order to avoid polarization, you have to engage with people who are who are willing to have a conversation. Okay, you can't have that with someone who's going to tie you down like
Okay.
that because
Right.
the imposition is already there. Now,
Yeah,
however,
no, I get what I think the problem that we're dealing with here is that you're envisioning someone different than I'm envisioning. So one of the things I said at first was that there's an extreme group of people that I wouldn't be able to have a conversation with, and that extreme group of people would be the people that you are describing and the people that would be arguing against Jordan Peterson in that video that made him famous. That told him to shut up, that told him, he's white, he can't say these sort of things. You can't have a conversation with them. The people that I am thinking of would be more celebrity like wokies like Trevor Noah, like James Corden, like Jimmy Kimmel. These people, they would all consider themselves woke and they would say that they follow the woke dogma, but they're clearly vastly different from the people that you find at Evergreen State or from the people that you find in that Jordan Peterson video. They are completely two different monsters. And I would argue that most people who consider themselves woke are closer to Trevor Noah than they are to people who were arguing against Brett Weinstein and told the president of Evergreen State to put his hands in his pocket. I think these two groups of people are different enough to the point where you could be in a relationship with one and not the other. And
right,
I
but
think most people would be like Trevor Noah, and those are the people that I'm referring about.
okay, yeah, so I'm getting there. So I was also in some rooms in which we had people who are nominally who are considered nominally the mid woke, who were willing to have those conversations, who were willing to engage in that area, and even then, even they didn't go as far as like some of these folks I was speaking to. Like there was a conversation in which one of these individuals who was talking about the body positivity, the fat acceptance movement, or whatever, and he says, no, I'm not into that because like it's unhealthy for people. And like I don't want to fat shame anybody. I mean, no one does, and these are his words, not mine. Although I agree with them.
Mhm.
I don't want to make fun. I don't want to make fun of anybody because they're fat. I don't want to like make them feel less than accepted. But I do want to tell them like for their own good, for the sake of people who love them and whatnot. You got to get in better shape. You got to take care of yourself and everything. And so there was that underlying humanity there. And if someone is willing to approach a conversation from that angle, and and especially we who are against the extreme wokeness, if we are willing to pursue principle above ideology, then there's a conversation to be had. And for those people like Trevor Noah, I don't know anything about him. Although, right, truthfully, I have not been impressed by what I've seen as of yet. I'm willing to consider that he's nominally woke, and I believe that people who consider themselves "quote unquote" woke right now are following along are acting in line with what they considered, what they think is good, but they haven't really thought things through. And if they saw a little bit more about like what critical race theory is, then they would probably switch sides and be like like what we and so many of our friends are, people who are pro social justice but anti woke. That's the issue we face here, because if if you're nominally woke and you fall into the trap that, I'm right, they're wrong, there's nothing to talk about, then we have a huge problem, because that's where polarization comes into play.
Mhm.
Um, and wokeness and religion are ideologies, and hopefully the people who are nominal haven't mangled, still have that underlying, those underlying values of real diversity, real inclusion, and real and equality, not necessarily equity. If those values are there, and their critical thinking processes haven't been entirely rotted away by the by woke critical race theory ideology, there's room for conversation, just like there is with someone who is a nominally conservative Christian, or nominally conservative Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever along the lines. If those underlying values are there,
Mhm.
then perhaps there is a conversation, and that's the thing we have to take care in mind, take in mind to remember, um, to if we really do care about reducing polarization. But again, I still stand by the idea. I think we both agree on this, that if someone goes a little bit too far, and they into wokeness or some kind of religion, that if they've truly gone cocoa for cocoa puffs, there really isn't anything to talk about. And you may you may as well try to have a conversation with a jihadi,
Mhm.
at that point, who's going to blow himself up in some kind of hostage situation. Well, at that point, there's nothing to talk about.
Mhm. Yeah, someone who is really, really on the far end of either spectrum, you wouldn't be able to have that many interesting conversations with them, because it would be much closer to speaking with someone in a cult than to speaking with someone who is just of a different, persuasion, intellectual persuasion. So with them, it's a lot harder. I can do I can do someone like Trevor Noah. I can do someone like Seth Andrews is pretty woke. I know you're a big fan of him. He's pretty woke. And in his book, when he criticized the left, his understanding of wokeness was almost really it was a very surface level understanding of what far left wokeism was. He clearly did not do his research, or he just didn't care enough to accurately describe the problem in that one chapter out of many others.
I've actually
So,
changed my stance in that regard. It's like I have and I really hate to say this, but I still have a high opinion of Seth Andrews. I like him a lot, but I really do think I come to agree that I think he's a lot more woke than I would like it. I still think I still think his heart is in the right place, and I think he's still one of those people who has their values
mhm,
in pointed in the right direction. But like, I don't think he truly understands how what wokeness is.
right.
And our mutual friend, like Thomas Sheedy, like I saw the interaction between him and Thomas on one of his posts. I did not like what he wrote to Thomas, and we both know him. Like Thomas is a sincere guy. It's someone I respect a lot. And you know,
Mm,
um, you know, with respect to Seth, I think that again, with all due respect, I think he's impugning on Thomas's motives, which I think Thomas is trying to do some good out there, and he's sincere in his actions. And
yeah.
I do like Seth, but there's the I don't think he understands wokeism, and the threat it is to the values that Seth holds dear, that we all hold dear,
Mhm.
and it's sad.
So replace the name Seth Andrews with your typical college student, and I think you would have most woke people on the planet. Maybe just a tiny, tiny tad bit more woke than Seth Andrews, but I think Seth Andrews is a good representation of your average woke person. The average, not someone who's on the extreme, or not the woke people who have the largest media narrative. But most woke people are Seth Andrews. So if you're saying what Seth Andrews is talking about is annoying, I think he misunderstands what people like Thomas Sheedy says, but his heart is in the right place. And I know enough about him to say that he is trying to have these conversations, trying to have them in good faith. Um, why don't you just replace Seth Andrews with your average college student?
It's a good question. Um, why wouldn't I do that? Seth is aware. He's dedicated a whole chapter in his book to criticizing wokeness, and why he doesn't go as far as while he doesn't go as far as I would like. He's demonstrated a willingness to touch the area. He's
Mhm.
demonstrated a willingness to realize there are fanatics on his own side, and he's realizing, and I think he realizes that at some point things go too far. He's demonstrated that from what I personally believe, and I'm perfectly willing to change my mind on this. From what I've seen so far in the general woke crowd, I have not seen this level of thought. As a matter of fact, like someone close to me has been trying to police me recently in some of my views and some of my words. The level of I saw a lot of wokeness there. I saw a scope creep in terms of language, like diversity and inclusion. When they just expanded those terms to mean something that they're not. I
Mhm.
saw the willingness to just to take offense on behalf of people who may not even be offended. I saw the straw manning of someone's views in order to fit something that was comfortable with their own. There were all the elements there. So could I replace Seth with? Could I replace one of these people on, like, say, college campus people with Seth? I don't think so, because I think Seth is still willing to revise his thoughts. I've seen that, but
Mhm.
from these general college students, no,
Okay.
not yet.
So if you meet a Trevor Noah woke person, but they say, "Yeah, like, look, I do believe in all these woke positions, but I'm willing to be proven wrong," would that be enough?
That would be a good start. Yes,
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. um.
because okay, so here's the thing. Most people most people would claim that they're out for social justice, right? Okay. The key word here isn't social; it's justice. So if you're willing to excuse someone because they're a minority, and you're not willing to take a look at the overall circumstances of a situation that's specific to that situation alone, then what you're doing is not justice.
Mhm.
And if you're willing to mangle that for social justice, then I contend that justice is not your goal, and therefore we have a problem there.
So I think this was a pretty fun conversation, a rather short one, um, mainly because you and I both have to go to bed early. Actually, I got something to do in the morning, and it's 10 p.m. where both of us are. So I'll probably go to sleep in about an hour. I still need a shower and all that stuff. But Bruce, as always, this has been a fantastic conversation. I love being able to talk to you about these sorts of things, and I'm glad I mentioned in the first episode I'm worried about this podcast series being us agreeing with each other consistently and, just basically describing one way or the other uh, why it is that we both agree with each other. But I'm glad that we managed to find something that we disagree on about in our second episode. So that's great. I think that's a good sign. That's a good sign for this podcast. So I'm glad we could find that.
Okay, let's see where it
Mhm.
goes from here.
Yeah. So Bruce, where can people find you on Twitter?
You can find me at Bruce Babylon on Twitter.
Mhm.
Um, one of these days, you just might actually see my real face. We'll see what
One of these
happens.
days.
Yeah.
Will that day be tomorrow? Will that day be next week? Well, anyways, thank you so much, guys, for listening to this second episode of whatever this podcast name. We still don't have it. We'll come up with a podcast soon. Um, Bruce, thank you once more for joining me on this journey, and I'm excited to talk to you in episode 3.